Blood stained the linoleum of Chicago's Memorial Hospital. Monitors screamed their flatline warnings, and amidst the mounting chaos stood Sarah. Unassuming, quiet, entirely invisible. Her colleagues thought she merely took vitals and changed bandages. They had no idea she was trained to dismantle biological terror until the federal agents breached the doors. Memorial Hospital's emergency department at 2 a.m. was a theater of controlled tragedy. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a sickly, relentless hum, casting harsh shadows over the faces of exhausted medical staff. In Trauma Bay 3, a team fought a losing battle over a victim of a devastating multi-vehicle collision. The air smelled of metallic blood, sharp antiseptic, and the sour sweat of panic. Dr. Harrison Sterling, a senior attending with a God complex and a notoriously short temper, barked orders as he blindly felt for a collapsing vein. "I need a central line kit now. Where's the damn ultrasound? He's crashing, push another epi." Hovering just at the periphery of the chaos was Nurse Sarah Hayes. She didn't run, she didn't shout. While the junior residents scrambled like startled birds, dropping sterile wrappers and bumping into IV poles, Sarah moved with a terrifying fluid economy. Before Dr. Sterling had even finished demanding the central line kit, it was already open, prepped, and resting beside his right hand. The ultrasound machine was powered on, the probe slick with gel, positioned exactly where he needed it. "V-fib," Sarah stated quietly, her voice cutting through the shouting without ever raising in volume. She already held the defibrillator paddles, charging to 200. "Clear!" Sterling yelled, grabbing the paddles from her. The patient's body arched off the table. The monitor flatlined, then hitched into a steady, rhythmic beep. Normal sinus rhythm. Sterling let out a ragged breath, wiping his forehead with the back of his surgical gown. "Good catch, Hayes. Good prep." He didn't look at her. He rarely did. To Dr. Sterling, and to the rest of Memorial Hospital, Sarah Hayes was a piece of high-functioning medical furniture. She was 32, wore her dull brown hair in a severe practical bun, and rarely participated in the break-room gossip. She picked up extra shifts, never complained about the belligerent drunks that flooded the ER on Friday nights, and seemed to possess no personal life whatsoever. In the staff lounge later that night, Brenda, a junior nurse with a penchant for dramatics, stirred her lukewarm coffee. "I'm telling you, she's a robot," Brenda whispered to Miriam, the formidable charge nurse. "Did you see her during the code? Not a single drop of sweat. She just stared at the monitor like she was watching a weather report." "It's unnatural," Miriam snorted, not looking up from the staffing schedule. "I don't pay her to have feelings, Brenda. I pay her to keep people from dying before the surgeons can get to them. Hayes is reliable. Boring, but reliable. Boring. It was the armor Sarah wore every single day. She cultivated it meticulously. When she sat in the corner of the cafeteria eating her plain turkey sandwich, she ensured her shoulders were slightly slouched, her eyes downcast. She read generic romance novels, burying her face in the pages to avoid conversation. No one noticed that her eyes constantly scanned the exits, tracking the hip bulges of off-duty police officers, calculating the exact distance between the triage desk and the nearest cover. At 4:15 a.m., the automatic sliding doors of the ambulance bay hissed open. However, there was no ambulance. A matte black SUV, its license plates coated in a thick layer of mud, idled just outside the red zone. The back door opened, and a man was violently shoved out onto the concrete. The SUV tires squealed, peeling out into the rainy Chicago night before anyone could even shout a license plate number. "We need a gurney," shouted a paramedic who happened to be outside smoking. Sarah was the first out the door. The freezing rain plastered her scrubs to her skin as she knelt beside the man. He was in his late 40s, dressed in what looked like an expensive, albeit shredded, tactical turtleneck and dark cargo pants. There was no blood, but he was convulsing violently, his heels drumming a frantic tattoo against the wet pavement. "Sir? Sir, can you hear me?" Sarah asked, her hands flying over his body, executing a rapid trauma assessment. No penetrating wounds, no obvious fractures. "Doctor," Sterling rushed out, pulling on a fresh pair of gloves. "What do we have? Hit and run?" "No trauma," Sarah replied, her voice tightening just a fraction. She pried the man's eyelids open. "Pinpoint pupils, profuse diaphoresis, bradycardia, he's seizing." "Drug dump," Sterling concluded instantly, his tone laced with disgust. "Another opioid overdose. Typical. Get him into Bay 1. Push 4 milligrams of Narcan IV. Doctor, I don't think. I didn't ask what you thought, Hayes. I told you to push Narcan. Move." They hoisted the convulsing man onto the gurney and slammed through the double doors. The sterile lights of the ER washed over the patient, revealing details that made the hair on the back of Sarah's neck stand up. There was a faint, sickly sweet scent, radiating from the man's skin like overripe fruit and burning copper. His muscle fasciculations weren't just tremors. They were aggressive, tearing muscle fibers beneath the skin. She grabbed his right wrist to establish a line and felt a raised, uneven scar, a barcode tattoo, hastily burned off. He's not a junkie, Sarah realized, her heart hammering a slow, deliberate rhythm against her ribs. That's a burnout mark. Mercenary, private military contractor. Narcan is in, Brenda announced, having pushed the syringe into the IV line Sarah had just established. They waited. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. The man's convulsions worsened. Copious amounts of white foam began to spill from his mouth, tinged with pink. The heart monitor began to wail. Beep, 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 beep. Heart rate is dropping. Brenda panicked. 30 beats per minute. 25. The Narcan isn't working. Push another 4 milligrams, Sterling yelled, grabbing a suction tube to clear the man's airway. Come on, stay with me, you idiot. Sarah stood perfectly still at the foot of the bed. The scent of burning copper, the pinpoint pupils, the overwhelming secretions. This wasn't heroin. This wasn't fentanyl. It was a synthetic organophosphate, a nerve agent. And based on the rapid onset and the specific sweet smell, it was a highly classified variant she hadn't seen since a black site operation in Eastern Europe 4 years ago. A variant designated Cyclops V. Dr. Sterling, do not push more Narcan, Sarah said. Her voice was no longer quiet. It resonated through the trauma bay, carrying a metallic edge of absolute command that made Brenda freeze with the syringe in her hand. Sterling whipped his head around, his eyes wide with fury. Excuse me? Did you just countermand my order, nurse? He hasn't overdosed on narcotics. He's experiencing cholinergic crisis due to organophosphate poisoning, Sarah stated, her hands already moving. She abandoned her submissive posture. She didn't walk to the crash cart. She commanded the space around it. Brenda, drop the Narcan. I need atropine. All of it. I need every vial we have in the Pyxis machine. 2 milligrams IV, push immediately. Then repeat every 5 minutes until secretions stop. And get pralidoxime, 1 gram over 15 minutes. Have you lost your mind? Sterling roared. You are a nurse. You do not diagnose. If you push that atropine and he's on stimulants, you'll stop his heart. His heart is already stopping, doctor, Sarah snapped, her eyes locking onto Sterling's with an intensity that made the senior physician physically take a step back. The dull, boring nurse was gone. The woman standing before him had eyes like flat, gray slate. If we don't administer atropine in the next 30 seconds, his diaphragm will paralyze, and he will suffocate on his own fluids. Step away from the airway. Before Sterling could physically intervene, Sarah slammed the atropine into the IV port. I am writing you up for this. Hayes, you are fired. You are done in this hospital, Sterling shouted, his face purple with rage. Sarah ignored him, her eyes fixed entirely on the monitor and the patient's chest. Come on, she whispered, a fierce, predatory focus radiating from her. Breathe. Slowly, agonizingly, the violent seizing began to subside. The heart rate monitor, which had plummeted to a lethal 15 beats per minute, hitched, stalled, and then began to climb. 30, 45, 60, the foam receding from his lips, the man took a massive, shuddering gasp of air. Brenda let out a sob of relief, dropping against the counter. Sterling stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing as he stared at the stabilized patient, then at Sarah. The impossibility of what had just happened short-circuited his medical training. She had diagnosed a practically non-existent chemical poisoning in under 3 minutes, overriding a senior physician, and she had been absolutely right. How? Sterling began, his voice trembling. How did you know? Sarah didn't look at him. She was already drawing up the second dose of atropine, her face a mask of cold calculation. She wasn't worried about being fired. She was worried about something much, much worse. Cyclops V was a weapon of mass disruption. It didn't belong on the streets of Chicago. It meant someone had brought a nightmare into her city, and the people hunting that nightmare were likely already on their way. Miriam, Sarah said, turning to the charge nurse who had just rushed into the bay. Initiate a code orange. Lock down the ER ventilation system immediately. No one comes in, no one goes out. Sarah, what are you talking about? A code orange is for hazmat. Before Miriam could finish the sentence, the ER waiting room erupted. It started with the shattering of reinforced glass. The heavy, sliding double doors of the ambulance bay didn't just open, they were violently wedged apart, the motor grinding and screaming as it broke. Get down, everyone on the ground, now! The voices were deafening, booming through portable megaphones and echoing off the tiled walls. Dozens of heavily armed figures poured into the triage area. They moved with terrifying, synchronized aggression, swarming the security desk, securing the corridors, and barricading the exits. They wore matte black tactical gear, Kevlar vests, and helmets. Emblazoned across their backs and chests in stark, glowing yellow letters was a single acronym, FBI. Patients in the waiting room screamed. A man clutching a broken arm dropped to the floor, sobbing. Nurses froze in the hallways, their hands raised in the air as laser sights danced across their scrubs. Secure the perimeter. I want this entire wing locked down. Nothing goes out over the radio. Kill the cell towers, yelled a tall, broad-shouldered man striding confidently through the center of the tactical formation. He wasn't wearing a helmet, just a dark suit beneath a heavy tactical vest. Special Agent in Charge, David Miller. His face was a map of deep-set stress lines, his eyes scanning the ER with desperate urgency. FBI! Who is the senior medical officer on duty? Miller roared, stepping into the main corridor, his hand resting instinctively on the grip of his holstered sidearm. Dr. Sterling, still reeling from the trauma bay, poked his head out of Bay 1, his hands trembling as he held them up. I'm Dr. Sterling. What is the meaning of this? You can't just storm a hospital. Miller crossed the distance in 3 massive strides, grabbing Sterling by the shoulder of his scrubs and backing him against the wall. The move was overly aggressive, a clear sign of a federal agent operating on the absolute razor's edge of panic. Listen to me very carefully, Doctor, Miller snarled, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. A man was dumped at your ambulance bay exactly 8 minutes ago. Caucasian, late 40s, wearing dark tactical gear. Where is he? He's in Bay 1, Sterling stammered, terrified. He was dying. He overdosed. Or poisoned. We stabilized him. Miller's eyes widened in shock. Stabilized? He's alive? He turned to his tactical lead. Bravo team, secure Bay 1. No one touches that patient. Agents swarmed past Sterling, raising their rifles as they approached the curtain of the trauma bay. Wait, Sterling yelled, finding a sudden panicked courage. My nurse is in there. Don't shoot. She's just a nurse. Miller pushed past the doctor, ripping the privacy curtain back. Inside, Brenda and Miriam were huddled in the corner, clutching each other in sheer terror at the sight of the assault rifles. In the center of the room, standing completely unfazed beside the patient, was Sarah. She was calmly checking the IV line, adjusting the drip rate. She didn't jump when the armed men breached the room. She didn't raise her hands. Step away from the patient, Miller commanded, stepping into the room. Hands where I can see them. Sarah finished adjusting the roller clamp on the IV, then slowly turned to face the special agent in charge. Her expression was utterly devoid of fear. It was a look of profound, exhausted irritation. He needs continuous cardiac monitoring, Agent, Sarah said smoothly, her voice betraying not a single tremor. And if your men don't lower their muzzles, they're going to cross-contaminate the sterile field. Miller blinked, taken aback by the sheer audacity of the scrub-clad woman. I don't care about your sterile field. You are dealing with a federal security threat. Step against the wall. Dr. Sterling stepped cautiously into the doorway, flanked by 2 armed agents. Please, just do what he says, Sarah. They're looking for him. Miller ignored the doctor, his eyes glued to the monitors, then down to the patient's chest. He saw the empty vials on the tray. What did you give him? Miller demanded. The toxin in his system is synthetic. There is no standard medical protocol for it. He should be dead. Atropine. Massive doses. Followed by pralidoxime, Sarah replied clinically. It bought him time, but his neuroreceptors are still degrading. He needs a specialized counteragent, or he'll hemorrhage into his brain within the hour. Miller stared at her, genuinely stunned. He looked back at his tactical lead. How the hell does a civilian nurse know the treatment protocol for a Class 4 biochemical agent? He turned his intense gaze back to Sarah. Who the hell are you? Before Sarah could answer, another agent, carrying a heavy encrypted communications pack, rushed into the bay. Sack Miller. I have Washington on the secure line. Deputy Director Vance is demanding a sit-rep. Miller cursed under his breath, grabbing the handset. Miller here. We have the package. He's at Memorial Hospital. Alive. He paused, listening to the voice crackling through the earpiece, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. Say again, Director. We need a medical extraction team, not a single operative. Miller listened for another tense moment, his eyes darting around the room, landing on Dr. Sterling, then Miriam, and finally sweeping over Sarah. Understood, Director. We will secure the perimeter and hold for her. Miller handed the comms pack back to the agent. He rubbed his temples, suddenly looking profoundly out of his depth. He cleared his throat, addressing the terrified medical staff in the room. Listen up. This facility is now under federal control. You will do exactly as we say. We are currently holding position until a specialized tactical medical commander arrives to take custody of this asset. A commander? Sterling asked, utterly bewildered. From where? The CDC? No, Miller said, his voice tight. Joint Special Operations Command. A Shadow Ops retrieval specialist. The director says she's already here in Chicago. Her transponder pinged inside this building. Miller stood up straighter, looking at the cowering doctors and nurses. He raised his voice to project into the hallway. I am looking for an operative operating under deep cover, Miller announced. I need you to direct me to Captain Hayes. Where is Captain Hayes? The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the rhythmic beeping of the stabilized patient's heart monitor. Dr. Sterling looked at Miriam. Miriam looked at Brenda. They were entirely baffled. There must be a mistake, Miriam stammered, stepping forward slightly, intimidated by the guns, but protective of her staff. We don't have any military personnel here. We certainly don't have a Captain Hayes. Miller scowled, checking a digital device strapped to his wrist. The signal is bouncing right on top of us. I don't have time for games. Who is Hayes? Miriam pointed a shaky finger toward the center of the room. We only have Nurse Hayes. Sarah Hayes. Miller followed her finger. His eyes landed on the unremarkable woman in the faded blue scrubs, the woman with the messy bun and the plain face. The woman who had just miraculously stabilized a man poisoned with a classified weapon. Sarah looked down at the patient. She let out a long, slow sigh, the kind of sigh that carries the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights. She reached up, pulled the hair tie from her head, and let her brown hair fall loose around her shoulders. The transformation was instantaneous and entirely terrifying. It wasn't magic, it was purely physical. She stopped slouching. Her spine snapped perfectly straight, adding 2 inches to her perceived height. The submissive, tired gaze of a night shift nurse vanished, replaced by the lethal, calculating stare of an apex predator. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. She reached beneath the collar of her scrubs, grasping a silver chain that no one had ever noticed before. With a sharp tug, she pulled it free. Dangling from the chain were 2 heavily worn military dog tags, glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. She let the dog tags fall against her chest, the metallic clink echoing sharply in the quiet room. Sarah took 3 deliberate steps towards Special Agent Miller. The FBI agents instinctively tightened their grips on their rifles, unsettled by the sheer aura of authority she suddenly projected. She stopped mere inches from Miller, looking him dead in the eye. I am Captain Hayes, JSOC Medical Extraction Task Force, Sarah said, her voice dropping an octave, ringing with unmistakable, ironclad authority. And Agent Miller, you and your men have just breached a contaminated hot zone without Level A hazmat gear. You are out of your jurisdiction. You are out of your depth. And as of this exact second, I am taking command of this hospital. Special Agent David Miller stood entirely paralyzed, the heavy assault rifle slung across his chest, suddenly feeling as useless as a child's plastic toy. The mundane, sterile world of Memorial Hospital had just violently collided with the shadow realm of black box military operations, and he was standing at ground zero. You expect me to believe a floor nurse is a JSOC task force commander? Miller scoffed, recovering a fractured ounce of his bravado. He squared his shoulders, trying to reassert his authority over the trauma bay. Director Reynolds didn't mention anything about a deep cover asset embedded in a civilian medical facility. Director Reynolds doesn't have the security clearance to know my deployment status, Agent Miller? Sarah cut him off, her voice cracking through the room like a whip. She didn't raise her volume, but the absolute, chilling certainty in her tone made several of the armed FBI agents shift uncomfortably. My authorization code is Echo Tango 79er Actual. Verify it with the Pentagon right now, if you want to waste time. But while you stand there arguing about jurisdiction, your men are actively dying. Miller blinked, his hostility faltering. What the hell are you talking about? Sarah pointed a steady, accusatory finger at the tactical agent standing closest to the shattered ambulance bay doors, a burly man gripping an M4 carbine with white-knuckled intensity. Agent Peterson, look up at the overhead fluorescent lights. Peterson frowned, confusion washing over his face as he tilted his head upward. His pupils are constricted to the size of pinpricks, Sarah stated, stepping forward with predatory grace. Extreme meiosis. It is the very first physiological indicator of secondary aerosolized exposure. When your tactical team breached the ambulance bay without Level A hazmat gear, you stepped directly through the concentrated dermal secretions the target left on the concrete. You tracked a Class 4 synthetic neurotoxin into a pressurized, climate-controlled environment. A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the emergency room staff. Brenda backed against the supply cabinets, covering her mouth with trembling hands. Are you feeling tightness in your chest, Peterson? Sarah demanded, her eyes locked onto the sweating agent. A slight metallic taste on the back of your tongue? Blurry peripheral vision? The agent swallowed hard, his face suddenly draining of color. He lowered his rifle slightly. I thought it was just the adrenaline, ma'am. It's not adrenaline. Your parasympathetic nervous system is currently cascading into failure, Sarah said coldly. She spun toward the charge nurse, shedding the last remnants of her subservient persona. Miriam, I need every single atropine auto-injector from the basement hazmat cache. Do not walk. Run. Miriam didn't hesitate for a microsecond. The sheer, terrifying authority radiating from the woman she had bossed around for 2 years overrode her fear of the armed federal agents. She sprinted down the hallway, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking frantically against the linoleum. Miller dropped his radio, the apocalyptic reality of the invisible threat finally sinking into his brain. Fall back, he yelled to his men, panic bleeding into his commands. Seal the bay doors. Evacuate the corridor. Nobody moves a single muscle, Sarah roared, physically stepping between Miller and the exit. If your men run out into the main hospital corridors, you will spread the aerosolized agent into the central HVAC intake. You will contaminate a facility holding 400 vulnerable patients. You are quarantined in this trauma bay. Lock the doors. Before Miller could process the tactical nightmare he had just orchestrated, the heart monitor attached to the mercenary on the bed spiked violently. The machine let out a sustained, piercing shriek. The man's eyes snapped open, bloodshot, wild, and dilated with primal terror. He lunged upward from the mattress with unnatural, chemically induced strength, tearing the IV lines from his arm. His hand shot out like a striking viper, grabbing Sarah's wrist in a crushing, desperate vice grip. Dr. Sterling shouted in alarm, stepping back. But Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't try to pull away. She leaned in closer, bringing her ear dangerously near the man's foaming mouth, completely disregarding the risk of cross-contamination. Unknown station. The dying man rasped, his vocal cords tearing with the brutal effort of forcing air past his paralyzing diaphragm. HVAC intakes. Rush hour. They rigged the canisters. I couldn't do it. His eyes rolled back into his skull, and he collapsed against the bloody mattress, his body going completely limp as the monitor flatlined again. Sarah checked his carotid pulse. Weak, thready, but still there. She looked up, meeting Miller's terrified gaze. The dynamic in the room had irreversibly and permanently shifted. The FBI special agent in charge was no longer running the operation. He was just another helpless bystander caught in Captain Hayes' war zone. It wasn't a drug dump, and he isn't just a target, Sarah said, her mind operating at light speed, calculating the logistical horror of a mass casualty event in downtown Chicago. He is a defector. The mercenary cell he belongs to is hitting Union Station at dawn. They plan to pump Cyclops V through the main ventilation system. We have exactly 2 hours and 40 minutes before 50,000 commuters inhale a lethal neuroparalytic. A deep, rhythmic thumping suddenly vibrated through the reinforced concrete of Memorial Hospital. The aggressive, mechanical beating rattled the surgical instruments on their stainless steel trays, signaling the arrival of Sarah's extraction unit. Black Hawks, Sarah noted calmly, her eyes flicking toward the ceiling. My ride is here. Within 60 seconds, the ER blast doors were breached again, not by a chaotic swarm of federal agents, but by a precise, silent phantom unit. 6 elite JSOC operators, clad in full charcoal gray CBRN suits and specialized M50 respiratory gas masks, filed into the trauma bay. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized lethality, their customized submachine guns held in tight, high-ready positions. One operator, distinguished by a red shoulder stripe, carried a heavy, temperature-controlled metallic briefcase adorned with the seal of the United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. He placed it on the surgical table and popped the biometric latches, revealing a row of advanced auto-injectors filled with a faintly glowing, pale blue liquid. Captain, the operator said, his voice mechanically distorted through the respirator. We brought the Genesis compound. Administer a full dose to the primary target, Sarah ordered, pointing to the unconscious mercenary. Then triage the exposed FBI agents. Give them half doses. It will make them violently ill, but it will synthesize the organophosphate before it binds to their neuroreceptors. Dr. Harrison Sterling watched in absolute, paralyzing awe. The Shadow medical team bypassed the senior physician entirely, looking only to Sarah for direction. Sarah turned to the medical tray, picking up heavy trauma shears. With swift, highly practiced motions, she cut the hospital scrubs directly off her body. Underneath the baggy blue fabric, she wore a skin-tight, black ballistic base layer designed for maximum mobility. The lead operator handed her a heavy tactical harness. Sarah strapped it on seamlessly, the Kevlar plates locking into place with sharp clicks, followed by a modular drop-leg holster containing a customized sidearm. In 90 seconds, the invisible nurse had completely vanished. Standing in her place was a hardened Tier 1 operative, Agent David Miller, suddenly clutching his stomach as the antidote aggressively wrenched his system, groaned. "What about Union Station? We need the National Guard." "If you call the Guard, the cell detonates early," Sarah replied, racking her weapon slide. "My team is going hunting." She turned toward the exit, pausing briefly. "Dr. Sterling." Sterling swallowed hard. "Yes, Captain?" "The patient in Bay 4 needs his abdominal bandages changed," Sarah said, a ghost of a dangerous smirk playing on her lips. "Don't use the cheap paper tape. He's allergic." Flanked by her strike team, Captain Hayes strode out, leaving the hospital behind to face the incoming storm. The fluorescent lights flickered in the silent trauma bay, illuminating the stunned medical staff left standing behind. Sarah Hayes was gone, swallowed by the dark Chicago night to fight an invisible war. They would never see the quiet, unassuming night nurse again. Yet, every time the ambulance bay doors hissed open, Dr. Sterling and his team would pause, forever haunted by the lethal shadow that had once walked among them.